And in our class, we don't have any new notes for today. Do you have copies of last week's notes, Brother Mitch? Okay, and so if you don't have copies of last week's notes, they can bring that to you so you can follow along. And we've got a new article. And if you did not get the article, if you'll raise your hand, Jared will bring that to you. So you've got that to follow along with as well. The new article talks about 15 health benefits of having a good sex life. And if you want your husband to live longer, then have more sex with him. If you want your wife to live longer, have more sex with her, because there's a lot of benefits to it. And you can read through and see some of those. And I think it's healthy spiritually, physically, mentally, and emotionally to have a very good and robust sex life as a married couple. And so you want to be doing that. Now, we're going to continue our study and talking about the physical relationship. And I'm not sure what page number we're on, because my page numbers are different. We're on under letter B, honorable, and we're at number 2, where it says for blank pleasure. And you can put in that blank, you can put the words his/her. His/her. Pleasure. Go over to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And look at verses 2 through 3. We're looking at the verse, we're using the verse from Hebrews where it says that the marriage bed is honorable and undefiled. And the Bible talks about it being for our pleasure. And we want to look at that aspect of the pleasure that God intends. He intends it for it to be something that we can enjoy, that satisfies us. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 2 and 3, it says, nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. And the word benevolence, we think of benevolence at this time of the year as helping out those that are in need and those that are poor. But the word here is the idea of honorable. It is providing that which is honorable. It's like the word honorarium. If I go and speak somewhere, usually they'll give me an honorarium and just thanking me for being there to speak for them. And we honor our spouse through giving of ourselves for their pleasure. And so sex is supposed to be for both the wife and the husband to enjoy and to have pleasure in. There's nothing wrong with enjoying the sexual relationship. It is not just for procreation, but God designed it for pleasure. That's why it feels so good. And so we need to make sure that each of our partners are enjoying the pleasure of the relationship. And there's certain words that we want to take a look there in doing that. It says, first of all, let the husband render unto the wife. And the word render means to give away, to give away. Sex is something for you to give, not your partner to take. It's for you to give, not your partner to take. And so you need to see that the sexual relationship is me giving myself to my wife or to my husband for their pleasure. I need to render unto them. And so it needs to be something that you look at as something, this is for me to give, not for my spouse to take. And then it says benevolence. And the word benevolence means kindness. And it carries the idea with understanding. In other words, it's understanding that person's need. When the Bible talks about kind, be kind one to another, the word kind, we kind of think of it in a kind of hallmark, fuzzy way of being nice to somebody. But the word kind literally means to be useful, to be useful. And so when I render due benevolence to my spouse, what I'm doing is showing them a kindness and with understanding. In other words, I'm understanding what do they need in this area. A woman's need is very different than a man's need. Your spouse has specific needs that are different than my spouse. And so we have to, in kindness, say, and that's with understanding, what does my spouse need from me in this area of the sexual satisfaction? And then it says that we talks about having power over your own body. It says in verse number 4, the wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband. Likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife. And the word power here means control. Control. And it carries the idea of great power. You need to understand the power that you have in yourself and what you give to your partner sexually. And so you need to understand that power that you have in over them, and use that power correctly. A lot of people have power and they use it as a weapon, as some way to control the other person. But it's more that you need to control this great power and not let it control you. So how can I use this power to be a blessing to my spouse? And then it says, defraud you not one the other, in verse number 5. And the word defraud means keeping back what is due. Keeping back what is due. If you look at verse 3 again, 1 Corinthians 7:3, it says, let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. This is due to them. This is one of the things that nobody else can do for your spouse. If my wife doesn't make me dinner, I can go out to eat. If there's something, if I need my clothes washed, I can take them to the laundry. There's a lot of things I can have somebody else do for me, but the one thing that nobody else can do for your spouse is this area of the physical relationship of satisfying your spouse's sexual needs. And so it's your dues, what you should give to them. You made a contract with them, and part of that contract is giving yourself to them. And so you need to not keep back what is due. Don't defraud them. You know, if you sign a contract and they don't fulfill that contract, that's called fraud. And don't commit fraud against your spouse. And then the incontinency is without self-control. And when you're incontinent, you have no control over your bladder. And we need to control this area more than any other area in our marriage relationship and providing for our spouse's needs. So it's without self-control. All right. Now, as we look at this, there's a couple of key words I want to talk about here in talking about pleasure. And letter A is pre-play. Pre-play. And that's before the bedroom. There's one of the books that I have down here. And again, we've got these different books on the sexual relationship that you can come and borrow them from our library. You can put them in a brown paper bag if you need to do that. And by the way, if you didn't get the book last week, Sex Problems and Questions, we have more copies of that. And what I tried to do in here is give a synopsis of most Christian authors' point of view on different questions that come up by many married couples. And so something that you can read might be helpful to you. But one of the books up here is called Sex Begins in the Kitchen. And what we need to realize is that your sexual relationship starts long before you step into the bedroom. Your sexual relationship, especially for the wife, but also for the husband, is all day long, and how you treat each other and how you respond to each other. And you need to realize that it needs to begin before you walk into the bedroom. For a lot of times men will, they go to bed and they're getting ready for bed and they say, well, how about tonight? And it's the first time they brought it up to their wife, and that's different. That's difficult. And I got her and him there, she needs attention. If you want to have a good sexual relationship with your wife, then you've got to give her attention outside of the bedroom. It can't be just when she comes to bed that you all of a sudden, hey, what about tonight? You've got to give attention to your spouse, and that's got to be happening outside the bedroom. Now, it also involves time. Most women need time to prepare themselves mentally, physically, emotionally for the sexual relationship. And so most women are not good with all of a sudden, hey, you want to have sex right now. They need time to prepare themselves. They need time to get everything done. Many women are busy, especially in the evening. Most couples, they find time in the evening because they're working during the day and all the rest of it. And so she's got the kids to take care of. She's got dinner to put away. She's got the dishes to wash. She's got all these things that she's doing. Now, one of the things that you men can do, and one of the pre-plays that you need to learn is very, very effective, is to wash dishes with your wife. If you go in and wash dishes, that is going to make a difference in the bedroom. It is to put the kids to bed and take that responsibility to get them into bed and read them their bedtime stories and pray with them. Doing things like that, that's part of the pre-play of the sexual relationship. And so you need to realize that. But your wife, generally, most women need time to prepare mentally, physically, emotionally. They need time to prepare for having time with you. And they need your attention. They don't want you to just wait until all of a sudden you're going to bed and now you're interested and you're paying attention to them. Now, men, what they need beforehand is they need admiration. They need you ladies to admire them and to show some desire towards them. A lot of men's complaint is that, I try to just show attention to my wife and she doesn't respond back to that. And it's like, I can't get her to pay attention to me in that way. But what he's looking for is that admiration, a little bit of flirting, a little bit of kind of what the Bible termed in Genesis as sporting, just to kind of play around a little bit. That's a little touching, a little talking, and while the kids are all there, you can use code words and things like that, and just really try to show him that attention by admiration and by leading up to it, so he begins to have that pleasure of looking forward to this. The anticipation that really makes it more enjoyable for a man is when he anticipates what's coming next, and when his wife is playing that anticipation towards him as well. And then, of course, you have the foreplay in the bedroom, and for the woman, touch is very, very important. Sight is secondary, and the reality is, men, that most women are not turned on by your body, and sight is not critical to them. In fact, they probably rather have you covered up than not, and so it's not as big a deal to them as men. Men are very much tuned into the sight, and that goes in the blank there. A man just gets a little bit of a glimpse of his wife, and all of a sudden he's interested. And sight is very, very important, and that's, ladies, why it's so important for you to give him that ability to see you. Listen, ladies, understand this: the world is showing your husband everything. I mean, you look at TV, you walk in the mall, and you can see everything and more than you want to see. And these women are showing it. By the way, ladies, keep it secret for your spouse. There are certain secret places on your body that should not be shown to the rest of the public. And you need to keep it secret and sacred for him. But the world isn't doing that. And so your husband is seen everywhere. And if he's a godly man and loves the Lord and loves you, he's trying his best not to look at it. And men, you have to learn to bounce your eyes. You just can't focus on women today. You see a woman, you gotta turn away from that quickly and not allow your eyes to dwell upon that, because that's naturally, as men, what we're attracted to. And so your husband needs to see you. And so you need to allow him to see you. And a lot of women have body image problems, and you may not think, well, this part of my body's not as good as it should be and everything, but listen, those are the parts of your body that only your husband can see. And that's all he's supposed to see, is your body and nobody else's. So whether it's perfect or not, that's what he gets. And so give it to him. And most guys aren't worried about whether it's perfect or not. And we understand this is what God has given to us. And there is an aspect of highlight. The Bible says in 1 Peter that love covers a multitude of sin. And so does some negligees. And learn to have the negligee that hides the bad parts and highlights the good parts. And there's nothing wrong with letting your husband have a little bit of a peek. And that's part of the pre-play, by the way, even, where you just allow him a little bit of expose yourself, a little bit of showing him what's coming later in the evening. And when you get in the bedroom, don't be afraid to let him see, because sight is critical to a man. And every man has different parts of your body that maybe he likes to focus on or whatever, but he enjoys looking at you. And you may not be perfect, but you're his. And so give it to him and let him enjoy it. And don't try to hide it from him. And don't be embarrassed by it, especially if he's telling you, hey, I love it, let me see it. But for the woman, she's not excited by sight, as generally. She wants you clean and neat, and she likes that kind of thing. But touch is important, and words are important to her. Now, men, touch is important, but not as much as women. Somebody once said that the woman's biggest sex organ is her skin. And just being touched anywhere is important to her. Now, I think the biggest sex organ is this one right here, and that is your brain. And so, fellas, you need to understand that if your wife is going to be ready for sex, it starts here. It doesn't start with the breast. It doesn't start with the legs. It doesn't start with any other part of the body. It starts right here. And that's why that pre-play is so important. The more you begin building towards that. And for men, it's the talking about sex specifically, where for the wife, that's not what it is. It's talking about life. It's talking about her. It's talking about your relationship and things like that that are important. So make sure you get that down. And then number 3 there is the full play, or right under foreplay, it talks about negligees and etc. I think they're good. There's nothing wrong with them. They highlight and hide things. They can spice up the bedroom. Be very careful, though, about role playing. When you're role playing, it's almost like you're saying, I want somebody different than my spouse. And you want to be very, very careful with that. But it's something that highlights and emphasizes the sexual nature of the body. There's nothing wrong with that. And then full play. And the full play is we need to realize that women build slowly. They're kind of like a crock pot, not a crack pot, but a crock pot. And when my wife cooks something in a crock pot, she puts it on in the morning, she turns it on low or warm, and it just kind of cooks all day long. And sometimes that's better cooking than when you try to do it fast. It's definitely better than a microwave, and it's even better to do it in the oven. And fellows, this is where, again, it goes back to what I said to begin with, and that is that if you want to have good sex at night, start in the morning. And give her time to warm up and just let it go throughout the day, whether it's what you do when you leave in the morning to go to work, it's what you do during the day when you make a phone call or send her a text or an email, it's what you do when you come home, it's what you do after dinner. All of that is part of warming her up in order to enjoy that full play. Now for men, more like a microwave. You push a couple buttons and beep, they're ready to go. And sometimes for the men, it's important to slow down. And as a man, you need to slow down and take your time. And even ladies, help him to slow down, because everything in him says, I want to get to the finish line. But part of the enjoyment is the journey as well. And so learning to enjoy that journey and getting to that finish line also. And then you have letter D, the orgasm. For women, an orgasm is not necessary but nice. There's a lot of studies done on this, and every woman is different. And I think it was about 20% of women have never actually experienced an orgasm, and there's 20% of women that have an orgasm almost every time they have sex. But generally, most women are in that middle ground where they don't have to have an orgasm in order to enjoy the sexual relationship. It's not necessary, but it is nice. And so you need to try to understand where your wife is at. You need to communicate between each other what you need, what you want. And sometimes a wife might say, you know what, I don't need the orgasm this time. I just will enjoy the closeness. I will enjoy bringing you pleasure. But you need to make sure you're communicating on this. And sometimes the wife doesn't even know. It's like she's not going to know until she reaches that point. Sometimes she says, no, I don't need to. And all of a sudden she is. And sometimes she's trying hard and it doesn't happen. It is different with every woman, and you need to understand that. Some men, it's almost like they put pressure on their wife that they've got to have this orgasm, and it's not always necessary. And you need to communicate together to see what is needed and what you're looking for. Now, for the man, to not have an orgasm is a frustration. They pretty well need to do it every time. And it's a frustration if they're not able to reach that point. And so men and women are very different on this. And you've got to understand those differences, and you've got to communicate about those differences between one another. And then letter E is the afterglow. The afterglow, when it's all over. For the woman, she needs some time and touch when it's over with. Where the man, once he's done, time stops. It's like, okay, and he's ready to turn over and go to sleep, or he's ready to get up and go watch TV or whatever. It's a very different response at the end of it. And you have to come again to that middle ground. If your wife wants some time of cuddling, some time of closeness, you need to give that to her. But ladies, you also understand, for the man, it's not that he's doing this on purpose. It's pretty well, once he gets to that point and the orgasm's over, it's like everything's done. And it's just a natural reaction that is built into men. And so we have to battle against that. And so these are just some steps that we need to be aware of. And again, as married couples, I think you already know all of this, but we have to be reminded of that. And that's where these books come in helpful. what I like to see is reading these books together as a couple where you can talk about it, because we don't communicate and we don't talk about these things, and you need to do that and make sure you're both on the same page and you both know what the other person needs, because there's no one size fits all. And every statement I've made here, there's probably a man or a woman who say, well, that's not me. And they're very different. There are some women that are much more, they need sight, and they're much more turned on by sight than other women. There's some men that are much more, they need that communication going on before they can have sex with their wife. It's not just like, I'm ready at a moment's notice. They need time to warm up. Everybody's different, and you need to determine that. And so at the end of the lesson, there's some books that are listed there that you can download off of Amazon or order, or some are up here. And I would recommend reading them. Two of the books that I do recommend that are helpful is the one, Is That All He Thinks About? And that's written by a woman for women, but it's good to read together as a husband and wife. And then there's another one, What Wives Wish Their Husbands Knew About Sex, and that's written for ladies and again for husbands to read. And it's a good one to read together as well. And so those can be fun books to read together and put into practice, and I would recommend that. And then number 3 is future pleasure. Future pleasure. One of the things you're going to find about the sexual relationship is as you go through stages of life, it's going to change. And about the time you think you got this figured out, we're finally in sync here, one or the other is going to change for whatever reasons. And it's when you have that you have the honeymoon stage, and then after about a year or so it changes, and then you have kids and it changes, and then you have menopause and that changes, and there's all kinds of stages where it changes. And so you've got to understand this is an evolving thing in your relationship, and you've got to keep working at it all the time and keep that communication open. What works today may not work tomorrow, and especially with the wives. Men tend to be with a few exceptions at different points, they tend to be consistent. The same things work. But for wives, it's not that way. And what works today is not necessarily going to work tomorrow. And there's going to be a lot of changes that are going to happen for her, both from day to day and week to week, as well as at different stages in life. And so you need to understand that and adjust to that. And so letter A, you need to talk about sex. I am absolutely amazed and sometimes flabbergasted at how little married couples actually talk about sex. I'm absolutely amazed at it. It ought to be a topic that anybody's free to talk about as a husband and wife. And in my counseling, I find that they really don't know, or they haven't talked about it, they haven't asked, and just how little they talk about that. And I would encourage you to take time to talk. And again, the books help you with that because they give you a basis to talk about. And sometimes they say things you want to say, but if you said it, it would be taken wrong. But because they say it, you can say, well, yeah, I like what he said. I like what she said. And now you're in agreement with that. It's a little easier for you to talk about that without giving offense or being offended. And then letter B is learn about sex from the right sources. From the right sources. Most of you, your knowledge of sex came through a sex ed class in school, which was probably not correct in a lot of areas, or it comes through magazines like Cosmopolitan, other ones like that, or it comes off of TV. We've got all the wrong sources for our sexual knowledge, and we need to get the right sources. And of course, the right one, first of all, is the Word of God, and that's why I'm going through these verses. I'm going through Song of Solomon. If you've read the devotions this week, it's been pretty straightforward with that. But God is very straightforward with that. And He's trying to give us some good knowledge in that area. And so learn about sex from the right sources, not from the wrong sources. And you go to the grocery store and you stand in line, there's those magazines, and they've got all these things about, 10 ways to blow his mind and 10, and all these other things. Ignore those. They're a bunch of garbage. There may be some little tidbits here and there that might work, but it's all focused on the wrong things. Now, there's things you can learn. There's techniques you can learn, or you can learn about where how the clitoris works, or where the G-spot is, or all these kind of things. Those are all good to learn, but learn them from the right sources, not the wrong sources. And there's some good information out there that can help you with that. And then letter C is prepare for changes in sex. Again, it's going to change. Be ready for it. When it comes, adjust with it. You will enjoy it. The adjustments can be good. They don't have to be bad. Now, letter C, the marriage bed is undefiled. What does that mean to be undefiled? I think there are certain things that defile the marriage bed, and one of them is pornography. Pornography is a major problem today. And ladies, you need to understand that most men, with very, very few exceptions, most men have struggled with pornography at some point in their life. Whether it's as a teenager, as a young adult, and especially in the military, or even today, it's everywhere. And most men have struggled with it. Again, I shouldn't be, but I'm kind of amazed at how many men were exposed to pornography as a teenager. Even around 13, 14 years old, sometimes even younger. Many of them, unfortunately, found their father's stash, or it was some friend that brought it. When I was a teenager back in the 1970s, pornography was there, but it was hard to come by. I remember the first time I was exposed to it, a friend of mine brought something he'd found in his dad's room, and it was more of a line drawing type thing, and that was about all that was available. And if you wanted pornography when I was a teenager, you had to kind of go looking for it. It was in the back alleys, it was hidden away, but you could find it if you went looking for it. Today, it comes looking for you. And if you have teenage boys, I can almost guarantee they've already seen pornography. And especially if you've got HBO and other premium channels like that coming to your home, he's seeing it. If you've got internet, it's happening. It's out there, and it's right there in the stores. You walk in the stores, and they've got women that are in the pictures, and women walking down the middle of the store. It's there, and it's a struggle because God designed men to be affected by sight. And so, ladies, you understand that your husband at some point or another has probably looked at pornography and has probably even struggled with it as far as it taking some kind of control in his life. And there are some men where it is an addiction, and an addiction that is bad as any drug addiction can be. And so, ladies, you understand that. Don't ignore it. On the back of your last page of the notes I gave you here is an article or kind of some paragraphs there. And one of them, the last one, talks about pornography. I believe that probably 99% of men have been exposed to pornography. And again, do your best to keep your kids from being exposed to it, and do your best to help them understand, don't start down this road, because it can easily become an addiction. And pornography should have no place in a healthy marriage at all. It just should not be in there. And for ladies, you understand, many men, their sexual fantasies, if they bring up something like, I want you to do this or do that, probably where that came from is pornography. They probably saw something at some point in some kind of pornography, and now that's kind of a fantasy, they want to do it in real life. And that's probably where it came from. And what either they've seen or read. And here's the problem. No wife can compete with the super sex women of pornography. Pornography is like wrestling. I remember I was talking to Tupu. We went to Michael's graduation and at the Blaisdell Center. And Tupu said when he was a kid, he used to go there and watch wrestling. And I remember watching wrestling as a kid. We thought it was all real. And they were slamming each other around. All of it was just acting. It wasn't real. And what you see in pornography, that's not real life. That's not real women. That's not what, they make it look like they love doing stuff that they don't love doing. It's just, it destroys your relationship. It doesn't exist, and you're giving unfair competition to your spouse when you're looking at pornography. And I think it's important for you as a man at some point to sit down with your wife and talk about and explain how much you've been exposed to pornography. You don't have to go into the nitty-gritty details, but you understand this is what I went through, this is what I struggled with, because you know what? The amount of exposure you've had to pornography is affecting your sexual relationship with your wife. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's affecting your sexual relationship with your wife. I counsel couples in premarital counseling. One of the things I want to know before I start dating a guy, if I were a girl, is how much pornography have you looked at? Because it's going to affect you later on in that relationship. Pornography is mental adultery. Mental adultery. The Bible says in Matthew chapter 5, verse 28, if you look upon a woman, lust in your heart, you've already committed adultery with her. And it's mental adultery. In Job chapter 31, Job said, I made a covenant with my eyes. I would not look upon a maid. Why? Because my heart is going to follow after my eyes. It's going to go in that direction. And Proverbs chapter 6 and verse number 25, Proverbs chapter 6 and verse number 25, the Bible says, lust not after her beauty in thine heart, neither let her take thee with her eyelids. And pornography is basically mental adultery. And when you look upon a woman, whether you're looking at a magazine, whether you're looking at a video, whether you're looking at the internet, or whether you're looking in real life, you're committing adultery. And I used to say this. I used to say, well, when does it become wrong? It's when the ooh in look becomes the us in lust. But you know what, fellas? Don't even do the look. You know, what I try to practice is when I'm driving down the road or I'm walking the mall or whatever, I see a woman, I turn my eyes. Whether she's dressed immodestly or not, I do not want to focus on her. I want to keep my focus on the Lord and on my wife. And so we need to be real careful about that. And there are some secular books and magazines and articles that tell you, oh, pornography will enhance your sexual relationship. It's a lie of the devil. And it does not. It just creates dissatisfaction with what God has given you. In Proverbs chapter 5, verses 19-20, it says, let her be as a loving hind and as a pleasant roe. Let her breast satisfy thee at all times, and be thou ravished always with her love. And why wilt thou, my son, be ravished with a strange woman and embrace the bosom of a stranger? You're looking at the naked breasts of a woman on the internet. You're not going to be satisfied with your wife. There's no competition. It's not fair. Because she can't compete with this. Not that there's something wrong with your wife. She can't compete with this airbrushed, camera angled, and all the rest of that. She can't compete. It's not fair to her when you're looking at pornography. And you need to realize that. In Romans chapter 1, it gives this long list of sin that we commit, and includes fornication and other sins of sexual sins. And it gets down to verse 31. It says without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful. And then verse 32 says, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. And there are some in this room that you would never consider committing adultery, but you will take pleasure in watching somebody on the screen doing it. And it's the same thing. And it's sin. And it will destroy your marriage. It's not going to enhance, it's not going to make it better. It's going to make you dissatisfied. When you eat a hot dog, you're not going to enjoy the steak as much. And so just let yourself enjoy what is yours, and don't let yourself get caught up in that. It also creates a loss of desire. Proverbs chapter 27 and verse number 7. Proverbs 27 and verse 7, the Bible says, the full soul loatheth the honeycomb, but to the hungry soul every bitter thing is sweet. It creates a loss of desire. When you're full, you have no appetite. One of the big studies going on right now with pornography is what's called PIED. And it's pornography-induced erectile dysfunction. And they're showing that how a lot of the ED problems, and we all see it on TV. I'm not telling you something you don't, your kids hear the commercials, all right? We all see it on TV. A lot of that problem is coming from pornography. Men that are exposed to pornography are ended up with erectile problems and their sexual problems, and they're not able to be able to have a satisfied relationship with their spouse. You don't want to end up there. You don't want to end up there. Again, in my counseling, I'm amazed how many women say to me, my husband will sit there and watch pornography. I can come out in a negligee and say, come to the bedroom, and he doesn't want to come. It just creates a dissatisfaction. It's not going to make you satisfied. It's going to take it away from you. And then letter D is unnatural affections. What happens is it's one of those drugs that just you got to have more. People start pornography. They start with things like Sports Illustrated swimsuit issues, or the lingerie ads in the newspaper or magazines, and then they got to get further. Now they got to have exposed breasts. Now they got to see the whole body, and now they've got to see actual. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. It doesn't stop because this doesn't satisfy. Now you got to have more. You know, really, why can't they just put one picture on the internet and that's enough? There are millions of pictures on there. Why do they have to look at all these different ones? Because they're not satisfied with one. It leads to unnatural affection. Pretty soon it's leading into all kinds of unnatural things. And it started with pornography. It ends up in really bad situations. I could sit here. I don't want. This is not only you want to talk about. I could tell you what some of the men have ended up in who started with pornography and where they ended up. And it all started with pornography. Don't start down that road. And if you're having a problem with it, you need to get victory over. We're going to have a lesson on pornography itself. Letter number 2. By the way, this is primarily a man's problem, but the world is trying to make it a woman's problem. And more they're trying to push this on women. And women generally, their pornography is more in reading books and movies and things like that, but it's being pushed more and more on women. Don't let yourself start down that road, ladies. Number 2 is what is right or wrong. And again, one of the things that will happen quite often is people will ask me, well, is this right? Sometimes people will do that directly. Sometimes people don't want to, and they kind of hint around. I got a friend that wants to know this, or sometimes I'll take questions and answers. Well, what about this or what about that? And there's certain areas that are asked more often than others, and that's why I put together that booklet. What I, again, tried to do in the booklet was to give you a synopsis of the major Christian authors. There's no clear set in the Bible, thou shalt or thou shalt not. It doesn't say thou shalt not do oral sex or it's okay to do it or what about toys or different things like that. It's not stated clearly. The Bible says it's honorable and undefiled. And as I said earlier in the lesson, I believe between a loving husband and wife that are caring about one another, there's very little that you can do is wrong in that you can do that would be wrong in the marriage relationship. But you both have to be convinced. And sometimes because of our upbringing, because of our experiences, because of other areas, for one person or the other, this is just not acceptable. And don't force something on somebody that they're not comfortable with. Now, a loving husband, a loving wife is going to be willing to explore a little bit with their spouse and be willing to try to expand this area of relationship, but never to force it on one another. And if one person or the other says this is not acceptable, it's not acceptable. And we need to keep that in mind. So again, I would encourage you to read that little booklet. It may be helpful to you, something that you can go through on your own. And again, some of these books also deal with that a little more detailed, and it may be helpful to you as well. If you look at the article there, Repack Your Baggage. Again, every relationship, we bring some baggage. If you've ever been in an airport, I remember one time, we were traveling. This was long before a lot of the restrictions on baggage, and we had a bunch of suitcases and stuff, and we missed our flight, and so we're having to stay in the airport overnight. And everywhere we go, we got to carry all this luggage. You can't leave it sitting around, and somebody might steal it, and so we're carrying all this luggage around. And I remember having suitcases under my arms and having suitcases in my hand. I'm kind of trying to get around, and all this weight. And some of you are carrying that baggage in your marriage relationship. And you're carrying sexual baggage there that you need to deal with. Now, you got to take, stuff goes with you, but you need to lighten it. One of the things that in our modern world is all of us try to travel as light as possible. And one, we don't want to pay the extra baggage fees. That's probably the biggest reason. And two is we just don't want to have to carry all that stuff around. So we look at our suitcase, well, I don't need this, and I don't need that. Get the baggage out, okay? And so all of us have baggage that comes mostly from previous sexual experience, either with each other. A lot of couples, married couples, they did things that were not correct before they got married, and they stepped over the line. Or it's with a previous partner or partners, or it's because of sexual abuse at some point in the past. And all of those are baggage we carry into our sexual relationship. And all three of those are going to affect your relationship as a couple, and you understand that. Now, the world says sexual experience before you get married is good. But that's a lie of the devil again. God intended that when you got married and when you're on your honeymoon, He intended for it to be a secret, sacred thing. His intention was the first time you ever saw somebody of the opposite sex without clothes on was in your honeymoon. He intended that it was secret and sacred just for the two of you. And today the world's taken it and made it a business. And so this is the baggage that we carry, whether it's the pornography you looked at, whether it's being abused as a child, whether it's how many partners you've had, or whether you crossed the line as a couple or whatever else it is. These are affecting your sexual relationship today. And so we need to understand that. Now, unfortunately, in today's society, there are fewer and fewer couples that come to their marriage relationship sexually pure. And that's the struggle that we're dealing with, especially if you were unsaved at the time, but even unfortunately Christians. And this again is something you need to openly deal with your children. You can't ignore this. It's not going to go away. And you can control it to a certain extent by controlling what comes into your home, but you cannot control everything. They're with friends, they're with even other people, they're seeing it, they're hearing it, and they're going to see it and hear it. And you've got to openly and honestly deal with it and help them to develop standards so they don't overstep that line and carry that baggage into their relationship. Now, whatever the baggage is, the first thing you do is confess it to God and confess it to your spouse. So if there's something in your past, pornography, abuse, whatever it is, you need to confess it to God and you need to confess it to your spouse. And genuinely forgive one another for past failures. So it's saying, before I met you, I overstepped the line. Or this happened or that happened. Or even as a couple, after you get married, realize before we were married, we were doing things we shouldn't have done. I want you to ask me, forgive me for treating you that way. I should have treated you with more respect and not done that. And you need to ask God's forgiveness and forgive one another as well. Now, the scars of the past are going to remain. You can't just forget that previous relationship. You can't just forget that abuse. You can't just forget pornography. That's one of the terrible things about pornography is the devil can't put a thought in your mind, but he can use what you put there. And sometimes at the worst moments, the devil can bring up a picture you looked at 20 years ago. And so you gotta realize the scars are still there, but you can get past that. And that forgiveness is a reminder of God's love and grace. And it's appreciation for what He's given you in each other. This is my past, but now we're moving forward together as a couple. And that's the way you need to approach it. Sexual abuse, fellas, you need to understand that a very high number of women have been sexually abused. If we went around this room tonight and women were open and transparent, I'm not going to ask you to do that, you would be amazed at how many women would tell you at some point in their life someone sexually abused them. This whole Me Too thing going on right now, it gets overblown and overdone, but at the same time there's a lot of truth to that. There are a lot of women who have been abused at some point, whether as a child, whether as a teenager, whether as an adult. They have been sexually abused by somebody, and that is affecting your sexual relationship. And ladies, if you haven't shared this with your husband, he thinks the problem is him. There's something wrong with me. You're responding because somebody abused you, but he thinks you're responding that way because of what he's doing. And that's why it is important at some point to deal with that and to understand it has an effect. And there are some women, there's certain things that they don't want done because here's a teenage girl that somebody abused her and fondled her breast all the time. And then so when her husband touched her breast, what's the memories coming back? The abuse. Don't touch. Now they may not say that, but they're reacting negatively because of the abuse, and the husband thinks it's because you don't want me touching you. You've got to deal with this. And fellows, you understand that even for a woman to talk about this, it brings everything back again. It's like she's being, in some cases, it's almost like you're being assaulted all over again. And so I don't recommend going into details. She doesn't need to say, well, this is how many times it happened, this is what he did, and all the rest. You should never go into details about abuse or about previous relationships. The details are not important. When I counsel a couple where there's adultery, they need to know what happened. There was adultery involved, but they don't, well, how many times and what did you do? That's not helpful. It doesn't solve anything. It's not useful in any way. And fellas, you understand that if your wife's going to open up to you, she's got to trust you, and she doesn't need you abusing her all over again because of the way you react. She's going to be watching. How are you going to react? Are you going to be disgusted with her? Because most women who've been abused feel like they did something wrong. And so that's important to realize that. And if a man's gone through that, it's also very difficult. In some ways, even harder if he's been abused by another man. So you need to understand that. That's baggage you're carrying in. You've got to deal with it. You cannot ignore it. And sometimes the only way you can deal with it is through a good counselor. But you've got to deal with it. Sexual immorality. 60% of people are not virgins when they get married. That breaks my heart. Breaks my heart for the next generation because that number is going to go up. It's not going to go down. And we need to understand that. And no matter how much the world tells you it's okay, you still feel guilty. The guilt is there because guilt doesn't go away because somebody says you don't have to feel guilty. And that guilt it's a very powerful emotion. It's going to hinder and overpower all other feelings. And so if there is some sexual immorality in your past, even again as a couple, if you don't deal with it, it's going to affect you even 10, 15, 20 years later in your marriage. So you need to, again, confess your sin before God. It's not always necessary to share past indiscretion. I don't recommend in every case you have to say, well, I had sex with somebody when I was a teenager or this or that. But in most cases, it's going to be necessary because it's affecting you. But you definitely don't need to share the details if it's with somebody else. That doesn't need to be there. So you need to deal with that. You need to confess it, get it taken care of, and move on from there. And then pornography, again, 99% of men have been exposed to pornography, and it is affecting your relationship, and you've got to be open and honest about that. And if you're struggling with it now, you've got to get victory. I'm amazed, again, how many fellas, single or teenagers, think, well, when I get married, it won't be a problem anymore. It is. Just because you're married, pornography doesn't solve a pornography problem. In fact, a lot of times it gets worse. And you need to understand that. It's not a problem of I don't have enough sex. And for the wife, it's difficult because it's like competition. It's like I'm not good enough, so you got to look at these pictures because I don't satisfy you. But a lot of cases, it's not about being satisfied or being good enough. Some of the guys that are married to some of the most quote-unquote beautiful women in the world still struggle with pornography. And they've got it right there in their own home. It's not about that. It's about other issues that are going on that have to be dealt with. And that's what we're going to deal with next, is we're going to do a lesson about pornography, not only for your sake as a couple, but for your children's sake. This is the battle of today, for our boys especially, and for our girls, because the world's saying you got to look like that. And this is the battle for today in doing that. Did I miss one, Diane? 1 Corinthians 6, and we talked about that in the past. It says that the sin of fornication, which is porneia, is a unique sin that affects you like no other sin. That's 1 Corinthians 6 and doing that. So it is a very unique sin in that way. All right. So here's some books, again, I recommend with that you might want to take a look at. We will bring the singles back in and deal with pornography. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do a lesson on 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter. Love suffered long and is kind. And the 13 characteristics of love, I think it's 13 or 16. And then we're going to do a summary of all that and we'll be done. So we're coming down towards the end. Hope it's been helpful to you. And I hope that this lesson, again, I tried not to be too graphic, but at the same time, the Bible's graphic, and I believe that I can follow that pattern to share with you things that might be helpful to you. If you're struggling in this area, start with the books, and if you have questions, you can write down the questions if you have specific questions, and I'll be glad to try to answer those at some point in the class. All right, let's go ahead and stand for a dismissing word of prayer.